Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Karina. It's English time tonight again. We are talking about social ties, equality and the glass ceiling. From what you saw in the intro, the glass ceiling was missing, but it is in your books, and I will try to explain to you what it is. So this stream is part of the umbrella topic of social ties. Its main focus or its main aim is to explain some concepts that are in your book that are maybe a little more difficult. There is streams on social ties and gender and equality and all that on the regular schedule. So what this stream is basically trying to do is to fill some voids that there are, maybe because it is not one of the very easy topics compared to others, I suppose. Nevertheless, it is a very current topic. I think gender equality, inequality is always an issue. If you read newspapers, then there is very frequently the issue coming up that women are still discriminated against men, especially in terms of pay and stuff, and that it's also harder for them to reach really well paid and really high positions in companies. And that is what the topic is about, really. So I will quickly talk you through the concept of affirmative action, which is something that we have in Austria as well, but it is a concept that is predominantly British and American, also Australian to some extent. So politics or politicians use affirmative action in all those countries where there are a lot of immigrants for whatever reasons. In countries like the States or in countries like Australia, it would be mainly aimed at the indigenous population of the country, so the people who were there first before the settlement by the whites. So, well, nowadays it obviously needs laws so as for them to be equal to the rest, but I will tell you what it is in a second. It is more famous, or the concept of affirmative action is maybe more famous under its nickname positive discrimination, which is a contradiction in terms. We know, or we have learned, that discrimination is never anything positive, but because affirmative action is kind of a, well, I think the term as such is quite hard to grasp, they kind of tried to find a nickname. Affirmative, to affirm something, means etwas bestätigen. So, well, you sort of affirm, confirm people who are minorities in certain areas of life. I will also tell you what the glass ceiling is. This is a concept that is very important in Austria as well. Austria, Germany, well, everywhere, all over the world, really. It's a metaphor, and I will let you know in a second what for. Then there are women quotas. This is definitely something we have in Austria as well, and all different sorts of other quotas that I will briefly mention. Yeah, that was it. So, affirmative action. As I said, maybe not that easy. Where's my... Oh, okay. Well, wrong stream. I just wanted to apologize for all the figures and data and names that there are, but there are none. So that is a different one. So, well, I probably have to tell you a bit more about it first, before, or in order for the slide to make sense. In countries like the UK, for example, there are a lot of people who don't have white skin color and who are not Catholics or Protestants, because they were legal immigrants back in the days when England needed people to work in England, especially after the World Wars, when they needed people for reconstruction. And because England had a lot of colonies back in the day, so there was Jamaica, Canada, India, and so on and so forth. They were British colonies, and all the people who lived in Jamaica, India, South Africa as well, they did have British passports, so they could come and live in the UK, in what is present-day UK, without any restrictions, without any problems. And they were very welcome because, as I said before, England was destroyed especially after the Second World War, and there was a lot of like reconstruction, house building, school building, and so on to do. That is what they basically invited the inhabitants of their colonies for, kind of promising that whatever life standards they had back in their country, it was definitely higher in the UK, which it certainly was as well. A lot of people came. So, as I said, we're talking about the Reconstruction period, 1945 to 1955, roughly, in the UK. The problem was that they did not go back, or most of them did not go back after the end of the Reconstruction period, after their workforce was needed. So they decided to stay in the United Kingdom because, well, yes, in terms of life standards, I don't know, schooling, healthcare, housing, like the whole medical infrastructure, and so on and so forth. The UK was for sure more developed than its colonies. So people stayed, and in the course of the time, so starting from the 1980s onwards roughly, people of black skin color or of a different religion, so different other than Protestants or Catholics, did have problems in all those official areas of life. So it would be harder for them to get into good schools. It would be harder for them to get good jobs. It would also be harder for them to get nice houses and apartments, because it is up to the landlord who they want to have in their houses. And many, not all of them of course, many landlords would be kind of like, well, we want white people. We only want white tenants. So that was why the black population, as an umbrella term, did have problems in many areas of public life. And that is why the government introduced what we now know as affirmative action. So it is, or it was done because there was a lot of discrimination of certain social groups going on in the areas that I mentioned before, housing, school, work, as in my example. So affirmative action is basically the contrary. Basically my explanation is kind of the other way around, like the other way around of what I had just explained. It is discrimination of certain social groups by explicitly granting them advantages in certain areas of life, housing and school. What? That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. Okay. That was one of those moments where I realized while reading my sentence that my sentence doesn't make any sense. Privileges, let's put it that way. Does that make more sense? Yeah, okay, that makes more sense. Sorry for that. Instead of, like, of course, people were not discriminated, but the law says that members of certain ethnic minorities, so as I said, Jamaicans, people from India, people from Africa, or people who are not Catholics and who are not Protestants, but who are, I don't know, Hindus, Sikhs, whatever, that they have to be, or that they are more important in the list of schools, for example. So if there is a white Protestant, let's say, child applying for a school and there's only one post left, so we have a white child and we have a black kid of a different ethnic background, then the black kid would have to, well, is more important in like the hierarchy, so they would get the place in the school first. Same holds true for housing. So if there's a black family, and excuse me my wording, but I have to simplify, if there's a black family and a white family applying for an apartment or for a council house, as like of which we have a lot in England, then it would be the black family who gets the house first because of affirmative action. That is why it is called positive discrimination. In this case, it would be the whites, the Catholics, the Protestants, who are discriminated against because people of minorities of different ethnic backgrounds would be the ones who, in this case, are advantaged. So they would get the job, they would get the house, they would get the place in school. Always under kind of like the premise that they have the exact same prerequisites, Voraussetzungen. So the black kid and the white kid, they would have had the same grades in what is English Unterstufe, and in jobs, the black person and the white person have the exact same qualifications, the exact same graduation, or from like an equally good university, and so on and so forth. So it has to be like same levels. And then affirmative action would privilege, in this case, the minority person. The whole thing started with the civil rights movement in the States, but happened basically at the same time in the UK as well. The idea spread to Europe. In the UK, a lot of discrimination was going on because of history. Africans and Jamaicans, as I said, they were invited to come to England to help, but then they were kind of like, well, now we don't have the same opportunities. We came and we helped you, and now we don't have the same opportunities than like UK locals would have. So there's the historical background. For affirmative action at work, so if a black person or person from India, whatever, gets a job instead of the white Catholic person, then this is called tokenism. It's a special concept for affirmative action at work. Why it has a special name, I don't know. A token is something very valuable that you get from someone and that you then keep because it is valuable and it brings you luck, whatever that is what a token is. Why it is then called tokenism, I don't know. But as I said, tokenism is affirmative action at work. The people from an ethnic minority or from a religious minority, whatever, getting a job instead of a white person. Two applicants, but the white person would not get the job. There's pros and cons as to everything. For reasons of simplicity, we start with the pros. So what you have here in green. Why is affirmative action important? Why do people still want it? It helps to create and sustain diversity and tolerance. So let's take a company as an example. The more people you have from different backgrounds, the more opinions you have, the more cultural diversity you have, the more input you have, the more stories you have. People would always, or would probably tell stories about their home country, I don't know, talk about their language, their lifestyle, whatever, and so on and so forth. This, on the other side, furthers tolerance. The more we know about other countries, the more people we know about from other countries, the more tolerant we get. So affirmative action was very much an endeavor by different governments to foster diversity and tolerance, which it probably has achieved to some extent. The second pro point is maybe the most heavily disputed one. People from minority groups or certain branches of people from minority groups always said that they need to, or they want to be compensated for so many years of discrimination. So if we look at the history of the world, it has usually been black people or people who are not white, let's put it that way, who were discriminated against by the white people. And so they basically said, well, we deserve affirmative action because we have been the subjects of severe incidents of discrimination, racism, whatever. So it's kind of, affirmative action was founded to create some kind of a balance between, or like to make up for it, like Wiedergutmachung, retribution kind of thing. And a very pessimistic outlook on the whole thing. Sometimes you need a law in order to be able to change things, because if there is no law, people don't change and attitudes don't change. Might not change if there's a law either, but then at least it gives, there is a law, it has to be put into practice, and it gives people from ethnic minorities a chance to work, get into good schools, get housing, whatever. The list of pros is a little longer. Opponents of the idea say, well, you kind of fight discrimination with discrimination. They say that affirmative action is reverse discrimination. So now white people get discriminated against by the system, maybe not so much by black people or by ethnic minorities as such, because they don't really actively do anything. But it's the system that says, well, white people are the losers in this like confrontation. So it is reverse discrimination. White people should not be discriminated against, and you can't fight racism with racism, basically. That is one point. I don't know why there is a thing. Has this very nice word, meritocracy, but a merit is a benefit that a person has. So what the point, it destroys the idea of meritocracy and it puts race as a dominant factor in admissions and hiring procedures. What the point means is basically that it is suddenly not the achievements of the people any longer that count. So you have race as the most important factor. If you want to apply for a really prestigious university in America, for example, it should be your achievements, your grades, whether or not you're good at sports, whatever. This should be the decisive factor, but not the fact that you're, I don't know, African American, Mexican, or whatever. So you should not, race is not more important than achievement, and that is what affirmative action does, according to its critics. The last point is that only because you have different religions, different skin colors, different languages in a company, that doesn't mean that people are tolerant enough to make something of it. So they might be there, but it doesn't help tolerance, and it doesn't foster acceptance either. So it would be a wrong calculation kind of thing to say, well, we are such a multi-ethnic company and there's no racism, no prejudice, no stereotypes going on. So simply having them doesn't make much of a difference. That is what the point says. It's always about what you make of it. And affirmative action reinforces stereotypes and racism. I think that's an important point because it basically says, well, ethnic minorities have always felt disadvantaged and have, with every right, complained about it, and that puts, or that probably fosters the ideas and confirms the ideas of people who are anti-immigration and anti-foreigners. Basically, to reinforce means verstärken, so whatever bad opinion we already have about people of a different skin color or about a different religion, if we hear that there's, that in their jobs, for example, that there was affirmative action going on, well, this kind of confirms what we think about them, and our opinion gets worse instead of better. Good. What is important for you in the exams, or what I would recommend you to know or recommend you to think about, is it discrimination? In Austria, we have this law that there needs to be a certain women quota fulfilled. So in big companies, there have to be women in leading positions. That is the law. If it hasn't changed, I don't know. At the moment, laws change quite quickly in Austria. Might have changed. But many countries have that. So there have to be women as the CEOs in like the top positions. Is this a good thing? Is it discrimination against men? Yes or no? In this case, against men. Is affirmative action in terms of housing, is this discrimination against white people? Or do ethnic minorities really deserve some kind of like retribution? Hard word means wieder gut machen. Well, talking about jobs, about the tokenism thing, how can we really make sure that it is fair? Like, how do we know that an applicant or that a position has to be filled after the whole procedure was fair? Can we? maybe also a topic to think about for you in the topic of work. And the women quota in Austria, your opinion. I already asked you that. Okay, I think that was it. You may want to look up the words that are here, affirmative action, glass ceiling, and the women quota, if you don't know what it is. I think that in the social ties topic, this is kind of a hot topic that you may be confronted with in your exams. One of the harder topics, but I think a very interesting one, and if you're well informed about it, like if you know something about the stuff, then it can also lead to some interesting kind of discussion. The more lively the discussion, the quicker the time goes in your dialogue, I suppose. So might be worth the effort having a look into it. That was it from my side. Was that it? Yeah, that was it. Thank you very much. Good night.